Good evening, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you all this evening with the beautiful Lejla Dauti. And Lejla is one of our guest authors in Unstoppable Stories. Myself and Lejla met back in Manchester in September 22 at the lovely Danny Wallace's event in Be Inspired. And Lejla, our energy is just really connected just from that moment on, really, Lejla.
Yeah, absolutely. As we always say, there was just something that drew us together, and there's so many conversations that we've had that have been so like light bulb moments for me. So yeah, definitely something brought us together. It's
Yeah.
September 2022, wherever it was, the universe knew what it was doing.
Yeah, and you know, I'm laughing later because we had this call scheduled for 7 p.m. this evening. Here we are at 7:49 going live to our people. So good evening, everybody. I hope you're all having a lovely evening. And it was really important to do Unstoppable Stories. We have 25 really powerful women in it, and one of the areas that was really important was what is the higher purpose about? How can we really make this purpose higher and higher? And inviting Lejla as a guest, and you're going to hear the incredible work Lejla does. That's what really makes it extra special. That's what brings it up another notch when we're speaking about being purposeful. That's what it means, Lejla, when we're speaking about making a difference in the world. And Lejla, I'd love first and foremost for you to introduce yourself to my audience. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
Sure. So my name is Lejla Dauti. I am a director and founder of Lejla Please Tell My Story. We are an online community and a non-profit organisation. We raise awareness for domestic abuse and provide recovery for female survivors after leaving a perpetrator. My journey really started out back in October 2019 when I left the perpetrator that I'd been married to for the best part of a decade. After leaving, there was this sense of just a complete, I felt like I was alone. I couldn't process any of the trauma that I had been subjected to. And no matter where I turned to, after that crisis level of support was over, no matter where I turned to, there was just nothing for survivors like myself, to make me feel like I could continue on in the world and actually have a life after, abuse. And it wasn't even that, actually, Geraldine, that it was lacking in quality, the support. It just didn't exist. There was nothing, no matter where I searched for it. And I did get to this point where it was a bit like, if you can't see the change, be the change. And so I took to social media and I started creating, I started sharing stories
Yeah,
on behalf of the women in my community, initially anonymously because they were just too afraid to come forward publicly
yeah,
for fear of judgment and shame. And as most survivors of domestic abuse will know that, a lot of the time we're met with very victim blaming questions like, why didn't you just leave? Why did you stay?
yeah,
Why didn't you fight back? Why did you fight back? You're just as bad as he is. Yada yada yada. There's so many different victim blaming and shaming questions that we're faced with. And so I started sharing these stories on behalf of the women in my community, and that's how the community was born. And the long and short, it was very quickly, actually, the women in my community no longer wanted to be anonymous, and they wanted to share their stories publicly. And
powerful.
that's how the survivors who broke their silence was born. And then again, as most communities, how they evolve, this one evolved really rapidly and really fast, which was a pure indicative need of how desperate female
Mhm.
survivors were for this space to be seen and heard. And we went from anonymous stories to this really public, full-on, actual professional production to me then setting up my non-profit organization, where we now not just have campaigns for raising awareness, but actually a whole recovery program for female survivors of domestic abuse, where we have counselling and therapeutic interventions, and also
Yeah.
life skill workshops, as well as community support groups, so peer support groups. So actually, Lejla Please Tell My Story went from just these stories that I was filming on my iPhone at the time to where I am today in February 20. That was in October 2020 when I first told the first story, and now we're in February 2024. We're an organisation filming really professional productions, and now going into the next stage of the organisation, we're about to hire in people to run the services, and it's just the growth that we've had as an organisation has been absolutely incredible in such a short space of time.
Yeah, and Lejla, in terms of your community, you have well over 20,000, around 20.
Yeah, so across our social media platforms, we are well over 20,000. Yeah.
It's incredible, Lejla. A huge congratulations, Lejla. Where are we in terms of domestic abuse? And I'm going to ask you that question as well in a moment, because I remember when I heard you speak in Manchester, you were very passionate about the language that we use. And it's the same in the world of suicide prevention that I use.
Mm.
When people speak about someone has committed suicide, that's the wrong language. They didn't commit a crime. It's death by suicide. And the same, Lejla, when you spoke about the domestic abuse, we hear domestic violence still being used a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing that I'm really big on is actually, you're 100% right, is the language that we use when we do talk about domestic abuse, because for all too long, domestic abuse has been seen as something that's taboo, that happens behind closed doors. It's something that happens between a married couple, and we don't touch it, we stay away from it. Victims are shamed into the background, not talking about it. And it's really why I was really keen on moving away from calling it domestic violence, because as we know, violence isn't the only thing that actually makes it abusive, that there is so many different aspects to domestic abuse. Abuse can be economical, it can be sexual, it can be emotional, mental. There are so many different, any action or behavior can be abusive when the perpetrator has an intent to take away your power and control. That doesn't just have to be a slap. They are just the most overt signs of abuse, and actually they are like the final cherry on the cake forms of abuse, because there is so many different parts of domestic abuse before you even get to the violence. Sorry, my phone was ringing. Apologies.
No, you were good.
If somebody was to ask me a question, after the first time that my perpetrator was violent with me, if they said, "Why didn't you just leave?" I'd say, "Well, why would I not? Why would I want to leave? Because, I had this whole really long standing period leading up to the violence that made me think that everything was my fault." So for me to sit here and say, "Why didn't I just leave?" I'd have to explain almost a decade, every single day's worth of gaslighting, of emotional abuse, of trauma bonding. And so that's why I'm really big on the language, why we don't call it domestic violence anymore, because it's not just the violence that makes it abusive.
Yeah, there's so many different areas. And Lejla, where are we moving right now today? Are we seeing improvements? Is it getting much worse? Where are we with it all?
No, we're not very different to where we were, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. The stats remain the same. 2 women a week are killed by their current or former partner. 70% of women and children are killed by the partner in the first year, by the ex-partner in the first year of leaving. Those stats, unfortunately, haven't shifted much at all.
So it's so sad, Lejla. It's so sad. So if I was to ask you, Lejla, what is the difference that you really want to bring? What's the imprint you want to bring into the world?
One of my biggest things in this work that I do is really amplifying the voices of female victims and survivors, because I think a big bugbear of mine is when we talk about domestic abuse, we lose the real identities of the victims and survivors. You're often in the TV, they're seen as blacked out figures, or maybe a shrinking violet. Have you seen the kind of the old school domestic abuse campaigns where the woman's in the corner and she's, like that? And actually, the reality is domestic abuse doesn't always happen like that, and most times doesn't happen like that at all. And for me, I'm really, really big on amplifying the voice, the real voices of the women who have been impacted and subjected to all these different forms of domestic abuse, and bringing their voices across, so that when we do make changes and we do pass bills and laws, that we are actually putting the victims and survivors at the center and the forefront of everything we do, because that's real trauma informed work.
Yes.
That it's not good enough just to say we're trauma informed and we're listening to the voices of victims, when actually are you really listening to these real life stories when women are telling you what they've been subjected to? What are you doing with that information to then make a difference going forward?
Yeah, and that's powerful, Lejla, because you're a beautiful example of that. Because look at the change you have walked the journey, and you're now a specialist in the sector, and you can make change. You really can. And it's the same as people who are the victims. They're the people that is going to really shape how we move forward and start to change these statistics, Lejla.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, a big part of why I do what I do and why I give the platform to the voices that I do, is because for too long we've been fed this narrative of what a perfect victim is. Again, I'm going to go back to that example of the perfect victim is someone who's carrying in the corner a wallflower who doesn't fight back. And actually, we need to really move away from that. Really, it's quite a harmful narrative that we put on women, that if you fight back, you're just as bad as he is, or you're just as bad as the perpetrator is. When really, what we need to do is we just need to listen to the real life case studies for what they are, regardless of whether we think someone's a perfect victim or not. Because when we start, actually, if I ask you a question, right?
Yeah.
Is violence bad? You'd say, of course it's bad. It's awful.
Yeah.
But then if we start saying violence is bad, but in this instance, it's not bad because she did this, or she was, I don't know, she spoke back, she hit back. But we just said that violence is bad regardless, right? So when you start putting different conditions onto what domestic abuse is, it's so harmful, and it only enables that cycle of abuse, and it only enables perpetrators to stay in power and continuously, regurgitate that cycle of how much harm they do to victims.
Yeah, it's absolutely unreal, Lejla, the work you're doing, and from our conversation this evening, like it's just going from strength to strength. So it's absolutely. I'm just so happy to have you in Unstoppable Stories, because for our listeners and for our viewers this evening, what will happen is that people know the royalties of the actual book are going back to suicide prevention, but Lejla will have an opportunity, as do our contributing authors, to buy the book and to actually get some money from each book, and which Lejla can then put back into what she wishes to around the community, which I feel is so beautiful and so powerful. And Lejla, I have to ask you, we're 25 powerful women, and there will be more opportunities where we'll all come together. We had the launch on Saturday. It was an incredible day, and we know you were there with us in spirit, but there'll be more opportunities where we will be in a room together, definitely. And each woman, the story is so unique. They've had their own journey, and so much uniqueness to everybody. But when we come together as women, it's just so powerful. What does it mean, Lejla, for you when women come together?
Oh, there's nothing like it. I mean, I am, me, like I love working with women, for women, serving women. I am an intersectional feminist at my core. I believe in putting the needs of women at the center of everything I do. For me to be around so many powerful and inspirational women it's a privilege, and it's a massive honor, because I look at everyone who's involved in the book and in the project, and I just think, wow. Wow, this is a powerful group of women who have come together to show the world that in spite of it all, we thrive. And we don't thrive because of what we've been through. We thrive because of the women that we are, actually the center of who we are. And I think that's really big for women to remember, that you don't need to be grateful for all of the awful experiences and what you've been subjected to in your life, that you are strong in spite of all of that, and you can only be strong because of who you are.
Yeah, no, it's so powerful, Emily, and we heard a lot from our host was Pat Slattery on Saturday, and he was really ingraining that message that we are not our story. Our story doesn't define who we are. Our story will start for me and you, Lejla. Once we end this call, we have a new story starting again, and I just feel that it's just so powerful, Lejla. The word unstoppable, Lejla, I think what's been fascinating about the project is that all these different perceptions of unstoppable, and for me, the word unstoppable, it through many different conversations, and it just felt a right fit from going of a place of being so stuck for so many years, perfectionism to unstoppable. I would just love to hear, what does the word unstoppable mean to you, Lejla?
My goodness, the word unstoppable to me means that there is nothing I cannot do. One of my many the sayings that I actually use throughout my life that has got me this far is, where there is a will, there is a way. And when there isn't a way, I will always create one.
Yeah.
And that to me is what unstoppable means. That if I have a vision and I have a higher purpose, that there is nothing that I will do not to make that vision come to life. So where there is a will, there is a way. And when there isn't a way, I will always create one.
Wow. So now for our listeners in tonight and whoever's watching back in replay, you can see exactly why Lejla is part of Unstoppable Stories, and so many synergies, Lejla. We just don't sit back, and there's a deep rooted passion, a deep rooted purpose. And when you create that alignment and what you stand for and what impact you want to make in the world, is a very, very special place to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Lejla, thank you so much for your time this evening. I'm so grateful, and it's an honor to have you in part of Unstoppable Stories. For our listeners and for our viewers this evening, and I'm saying listeners from the podcast, you see that just rhyming off my tongue there. And for our viewers and then watching in this evening, the book actually sold out really fast at the weekend. So we are expecting a restock on Friday morning from the major platform Amazon, and it is available on other platforms as well. So please watch out for that. But from myself and from the beautiful Lejla, it's good evening from Unstoppable Stories.
Thank you so much for having me, Geraldine.
Take care, Lejla. Bye-bye. Bye.